Welcome to Conversations with Sarah. I'm your host, Sarah Reddan, therapeutic coach, creator of the Self Care Club membership, and author of the Self Care Journey books. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to be notified of new episodes. So, today I'm joined by Lauren Hughes from Affinity Women's Networking, and we're going to have a conversation about community and connection. Thank you for joining me, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. It's lovely to be here.
So I'm really kind of excited to talk with you. I know like some of your story that you're going to share is quite personal, but I feel like we've got some real kind of common ground and things that are important to us both that I'm hoping we can share out for people that are listening. For those that don't know you, would you like to share a little about yourself, please?
Yeah, of course. I think I'd probably start by describing myself as a bit of a walking paradox. So I can be horribly intense, but also incredibly light and a little bit weird and wonky. I'm very sciencey, but I also love a bit of weirdy woo. I would describe myself as overly enthusiastic. My mum once described me as incessantly helpful, with a little bit of venom in her voice. I think I may have been irritating her at that moment in time, just pandering to her, making sure she was okay. I am deeply empathetic. I love working with people. I also quite like being on my own. So there's lots of paradoxes, but I accept all of these things about myself. It has been a journey, but I think that I've gotten to a place now. Let's face it, we're never there, are we? We're never fully there. It's always a
Absolutely
journey,
not.
always a work in progress. But I've definitely gotten to a place where I have deeply accepted all of these things about me. And occasionally things come up that I don't feel comfortable with, but I then look at working on those things, unless somebody else has asked me to work on those things, in which case they're not the people for me, and that's fine. So there's it's been a journey for me. I've done a lot of work, I've done a lot of therapy, I've done a lot of self-reflection. I've had a very, very difficult childhood, I would say. I'm not going to compare it. There are plenty of people who have had worse, plenty of people that have had better, but we shouldn't ever compare our experiences to those of others, because it's our experience at the end of the day. It's personal to us. But I've learned to grow through a lot of those traumas, and they've made me, they are a huge part of who I am. And I actually wouldn't change any of it,
Mm.
because I like who I am and where I am.
And I'm sitting nodding. So this is the first time that we've ever had a conversation. I kind of exist in some of your spaces. I have had my eye on you for a little while to come and be a guest. So I was really excited when you said yeah, because I can see similarities in little bits. And I love as you were talking about like the paradox of who you are, because I very much explain myself in that way as well. The duality of being. We can be very, very sensible and playful and have lots of fun. It's so important to be able to hold all of the parts of who you are. And I also big nod with when I'm quite happy to work on myself unless I'm told to do so.
Right?
The demand avoidance is very strong within
Absolutely. It's
me.
that rebel heart, Sarah, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Even at my own detriment. If
I
someone,
think,
if
okay,
I've
so that's
chosen to
that.
do something and somebody tells me to do it, I immediately just can't do it. So I
I
don't know
think
if
I
it's that
have
strong for
that.
you.
I have that same gut feeling, but I do have that conversation with myself about if it's worth it for me. Like, do I actually want to do this thing?
Yeah,
If it's just for them, absolutely not. But if it's something that I think is going to benefit me, then I will. I'll work through that crappy feeling that I have in the beginning of
hmm
no, absolutely not. Oh, wait a second.
yeah, yeah. Because at that point it becomes choice again. Well, for me it becomes
Choice.
choice again. I'm having that internal dialogue and kind of unpicking. Okay, so I was going to do this thing. Now I've been told to do this thing. Do I still want to do the thing? Yeah, I'm choosing to do the thing, and I'm choosing not to listen to what I'm being told to do. So interesting kind of way of being.
Absolutely. But it's all about that internal dialogue, isn't it, really? And like you said, choice. Choice is just, and actually, choice plays a massive part in my journey. We'll probably get into that a little bit more anyway. But I think that it's really great that you brought that up so early on.
Yeah, and I'm going to lead you back into like your journey because I know, like you said when we were talking, that sort of your experiences that you had is what led you into your business. So I don't know if you want to share what you want to share of your story.
Absolutely. So this sounds, even coming out of my mouth, to me, it sounds like a bizarre statement to make. But my business, which is I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I believe hands down the most beautiful women's network that there is. It just, to me, it feels like home to so many of the ladies there. They have this incredible sense of belonging that they have literally said to me, I've never felt this way before. I've never felt like I belonged anywhere like I belong here. And it's just the most incredible, supportive, nurturing, loving space. So my business wouldn't exist. This is the weird statement. My business wouldn't exist if my dad hadn't killed himself, which sounds like a bizarre connection to make. But the truth is that I wouldn't be the person that I am if I hadn't experienced all the traumas that I've experienced. So I spend a lot of time talking about how, of course, trauma is bad. It's terrifying. It's, you know, it feels damaging. It feels like it completely breaks us sometimes. But actually, for me, I felt like, and I've had this discussion many times with people in different ways, and some people agree, some people disagree. I felt like I had to break. You know, this statement, we're all broken. A lot of people disagree with it. It's like, well, but we're not broken. We're not broken because that's a bad thing. But actually, I think it's a good thing to be broken open. I think it's a really good thing to be cracked open, so you can look at all of your broken pieces and you can decide which bits you want to keep. That's the best way that I can describe it. So I felt like I took out all of the parts of me that had become a part of who I am, become a part of my personality, some behaviors that I really didn't want. It's like I took all of that stuff out and I put myself back together with the pieces that I wanted to keep. It wasn't as simple as like, yeah, sure, let's just do that.
Yeah, just put it out and just like, I'll have that bit and that bit, like a little pick and mix.
Just like a kid in a sweet shop. I'll take this one and that one. It wasn't quite so simple as that, obviously. I am oversimplifying it, but ultimately, when I look back on my experience, my story, that's kind of what I've taken from it. So I'll try and keep this as succinct as I can. My childhood was difficult. I have a brother who's older than me, and he is a year older than me, and it was the squeaky wheel that got the grease kind of scenario. I was very quiet, and I think because of that, everybody thought that I was okay. So all the stuff's going on around me. My mum and dad divorced when I was 2 because my dad was incredibly violent to my mum. He would, you know, beat her unconscious. He broke her arm. There was a lot of domestic violence going on. And he wasn't violent towards us. He was actually, with me, I was almost like my mum's savior in a way. She would pick me up occasionally when he was going for her to, and use me almost like a shield, because she knew she would be safe if she was holding me. And I think from that, I have this deep sense of responsibility to protect people. I think it probably comes from there some way, some shape. But my mum and dad divorced when I was 2. He still was around. He still was very unwell. He was a very unwell man. He was very unhappy. He experienced an awful lot of trauma himself in his life, as did my mum, which I think is kind of why they found each other. They both had sort of broken bits that fit together in a very strange, wonky way. I do believe we choose people sometimes because we feel like we have to subconsciously. All of this is subconscious. We can never do this consciously. We choose people because we feel like we have something to learn from them, or because it keeps us in a place of pain that we think we deserve. You know, I mean, that's probably a whole other podcast. Anyway, so my dad attempted suicide many, many times. I remember the first time going to see him in the hospital when I was 11, and my mum told me it was something else, but I knew what it was. I saw the bandages on his wrists and I knew straight away. And it happened many times after that. There was a time before, the day before my first GCSE exam, I was predicted all A's and B's, and my dad turned up at my house the day before. I remember the first exam was RE, and he shows up the day before and he tells me that, and bearing in mind that I idolized my dad. I mean, he was on an absolute pedestal. I loved him so much. And I deeply believed that my love would be enough to keep him here.
Yeah.
Partly because my mum said to me, with love, she said it with love, never with, it was never loaded, but she said to me when I was 13, if anyone can save your dad, you can. And it was a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, what a lot to carry.
Yeah, and she knows that now as well. She meant it purely as a, like, he loves you so much that he would.
But it came from where she was at that time as well. Like, we can only do what we can do in the time. We learn as we go along.
Of course, absolutely. So he comes to the house and he tells me when I'm 15 that nothing's worth living for. And he tells me that he wants to die. He tells me he's going to kill himself that day. And I was obviously so distraught that my mum threw him out the house. And then I was angry at her because I was like, Mum, I've got work to do here. You told me I could save him. I'm working. It was like, that was the thought process. So I was angry at her. And then I chased him down the garden path. I threw my arms around his legs and I begged him not to go. And he just pushed me away and he left. And I didn't see him for months afterwards. And I thought he was gone. And a few weeks after my exams, this is the moment, right? This is the moment for me when everything changed. I was sat on the swings in the park by myself. There was nobody else around. And I remember thinking to myself, if I just disappeared now, nobody would even notice. Nobody. And I fully, deeply believed that in my bones. And then I had this moment of, wait a second. I am worthless if my parents' behavior is correct and right, because the behavior of those two around me, because my mum suffered as well. She suffered with depression for many, many years. She is my biggest inspiration. She's the most incredible woman. She's so loving, so giving. She has dealt with so much in her life and is still standing somehow, which I have no idea how that's possible. But she has suffered with mental illness as well. So I thought to myself, well, hang on a second. If my parents are perfect beings and their behavior is correct, then this is the sciencey brain, then that determines me as worthless. However, I know that both of my parents are a little bit wonky because they've had their experiences that have created their personalities, their energy, their behaviors, all of that stuff is influenced by their experiences in life. And I thought to myself, well, hang on a second. If they're not superhuman, which they're not, because nobody is, nobody's perfect. We are all infallible. We all make mistakes sometimes. We're all just doing the best we can with what we've got. And I thought to myself, well, if that's the case, then I'm not worthless. I have my own worth, my own value. And I've realized quite recently that what I did in that moment was I stopped seeing myself as an extension of my parents. I saw myself as my own being, having my own value, my own worth that was completely separate from anything else in the world. I had my own value because I existed. And I decided I wanted to be a happy person. I decided I wanted to be successful. I decided I wanted to be confident, because at that point in time, I felt worthless. I felt like I was nothing. I felt like my voice didn't mean anything. Nobody had ever listened to me. I spent my entire childhood trying to make people around me happy. And everybody around me was depressed. I was literally setting myself up for failure on a daily basis.
Yeah, how much responsibility that you internalized.
Yeah, it was too much for a child. And I still have it. I still have that massive sense of responsibility, but I'm so much more aware of it now and I can feel it when it comes up.
Yeah.
And I own that myself. You know, I don't put that on anybody else, because I'm a big advocate for empowering yourself by recognizing your own behaviors and your own belief systems and knowing that they don't necessarily serve you or other people sometimes. So yeah, something changed that day, and I didn't obviously overnight just suddenly become a wild success, hugely confident person. It took many, many years.
Absolutely.
But it was a decision. It was that choice. It was that realization that I didn't have to go along with the flow of, you know, the way that my life was taking me based on what my family life was like. I decided I wanted to go a different way, and I did.
What a young age to have such a powerful realization, because like there's many of us that go through life, and I think women especially, we're kind of really conditioned by society and the way a woman is supposed to be. And it's maybe for a lot of women, they hit sort of 30, 35 and have this massive awakening of, hold on. I mean, we know that we're separate to people, but it becomes very entangled. Our acceptance of ourselves becomes very entangled in how we're accepted by other people. So to have that at such a young age feels like so powerful in how you can then move forward with your life from where you'd started.
Absolutely. And I know this sounds like a bit of a weird thing to say, but I'm so grateful to my 15-year-old self for realizing that then, because it meant that I could do the work then and be now at the age that I'm at 40, I can actually be like, I have such deep self-acceptance, and part of that is realizing, like I said, I'm not there yet. There are still things that I'd like to heal, things that I would like to change, ways that I want to grow, and an acceptance of, well, actually, you know, even tomorrow I'm not going to be the same person I am today. And knowing that you have choice over that. We get to decide who we want to be. And a big thing, this is completely separate tangent. I mentioned I love a tangent.
That's fine, and I love a tangent too, so I'll just follow you and we'll see where we go.
So the big thing that's been coming up for me recently is about permission, right? So I went to photograph. So I'm a photographer as well as running my ladies networking group. I went to photograph a marketing retreat, but I got involved in some of the workshops as well in September. And one of the ladies there, we were doing a forest bathing event, and one of the ladies there we were walking barefoot at this point, because it was part of it, like to feel the earth and, you know, and your feet connected. And we were walking for quite a while, and there's stones and sticks and things, so occasionally you'd step on something that hurt a little bit. And she said, oh God, I think my feet have had enough. And I said, put your shoes and socks back on then. Like literally without even thinking about it. She went, oh no, I can't, nobody else is. And I was like, what? If your feet are hurting, put your shoes and socks back on. And she actually since has, because I went live in my group to talk about this, I didn't mention a name, obviously, because it's not about shaming people. It's about helping people bring their awareness to whatever's going on for them in that moment.
It's that moment of realization as well, isn't it? It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and she actually, her response to it was, thank you for highlighting that for me, because I realized that actually I was putting myself through something subconsciously but intentionally, because I felt like I deserved pain, or I felt like I had to learn something. And that was really an interesting response. But it bothered me that we don't give ourselves permission to do the things that we want or need. And another example was a sound healing day that I went to, where we were kind of playing with the instruments. There was a great big gong that's like a meter wide, huge, beautiful sound, like it really deeply felt it in your body. And there was another gong that was slightly smaller, and then the rest of us were playing with like chimes and singing bowls and whatnot. And the lady on the smaller gong was a friend of mine, and I knew she was going through some stuff, right? So we'd had a sharing circle before. The lady on the big gong was also going through some very heavy stuff. And I looked at my friend on the small gong and I went, go on, give it some. Because she was like ting, 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 ting. And so was the lady on the big gong.
Yeah.
I was like, go on, give it some. And she went bong, and just the sound reverberated through the entire room. And then the lady on the big gong went dong, like this huge sound. And then afterwards she said, oh, I only did that because you did it on your gong. And then my friend only did it because I said, go on, give it some. I was like, guys, you clearly wanted to do that. Why were you waiting for someone to give you permission? Right?
Yeah.
So I've got, like, this is just ringing around my head now. Why are we waiting for people to give us permission to do the things that we want, to do the things that we need? If we're not hurting anybody else, why are we stopping ourselves from doing these things?
And and I think this is so important, and I think it's something I get quite excited about, that self-permission, that giving permission to yourself. I mean, I share permission slips in my community and encourage people to give themselves permission to do things.
Nice.
Because we automatically kind of get a bit smaller, or like, you know, keep the status quo, and don't necessarily recognize that, you know, I want to do this thing. And there's so much, I've got like loads of energy, there's so much power. It's expansive though. There's so much power in stepping into giving yourself permission. And like you say, not to be an arsehole, not to be taking from other people, but to allow yourself to expand and be playful, be joyful, be exactly however it is you feel you need to be. Like putting your shoes on sounds like such a like rational thing to do. Your feet are hurting, why would you not put your shoes on? Because you feel, and that phrase really resonated for me, that you feel you need to learn something. And that plays out in toxic relationships, in toxic workplaces, in environments that you don't need to be in, because you don't feel able to give yourself permission to step out of what is expected of you and claim what it is that is what you need.
Absolutely. And to be honest, like I'm all down with it if you are putting yourself through something with intention because you want to learn something from it. I'm okay with that because I'm fine. I like lean into the discomfort, right? Big
Yeah.
fan of that because we do learn when we get
And
outside.
that's a different thing, isn't it? So
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of being comfortable in the uncomfortable as you're working through a therapeutic process or something you need to do. But yeah, I'm definitely thinking myself where I've been in situations in life and that whole, oh, I need to learn a lesson in this and I need to learn to be patient or I need to learn. Actually, no, I don't. My anger is valid. The
Mm.
experience that I'm having right now, what's going on for me is valid and is telling me that what's I'm experiencing is actually not okay and I can do something about this if I want to.
Absolutely. And I think we do, the big problem is when we allow ourselves to stay in situations that are uncomfortable to us because on some level we feel like we deserve the pain. Because that, all of that, I think is it on the most part is unconscious. And
I
if it's
think so.
conscious, then we've got a real problem because that's a real self-harming behavior then, isn't it? That
Yeah.
we're putting ourselves through pain because we think we deserve it. We really need to have a good conversation with ourselves, a very loving, kind, non-judgmental conversation with ourselves when we're in that
Mm.
kind of place. But when we don't know, we've got even less power. When we're letting ourselves stay in these situations that are painful to us, we're allowing that to happen to us. That's even worse, isn't it? Because you're completely disempowered in that situation because you don't even know that you're doing it.
Mm. And I think, like, when we bring it back to the topic, that is where kind of community and connection are important because when you're, as a woman, in communities with other women and you start to have these conversations and you start to realize, oh, yeah, to a degree, I choose this thing unconsciously. Um, but there's someone over here that's experienced this and have come through it, or they've used a tool, or it starts to open your mind up to the unconscious choices that you make, and that there is possibility of a different outcome. There is possibility of a different choice.
Yeah.
Because if you've always lived a certain way, if your family of origin have always done a thing, it just becomes this unconscious thing that you do. And until you experience the wider world, sometimes we just don't question things because we haven't yet opened our eyes up to that we need to.
Absolutely. I was having a conversation with some of the ladies in my group the other day, and one of them was talking about her relationship. And another lady said, "You're in an abusive relationship." And she went, "Oh God, I am." And she didn't
Mm,
realize until she'd actually
mm,
said those things out loud to somebody else because you believe it's normal. You believe it's okay because that's kind of what you've always experienced.
mm,
And something, a fabulous conversation with a lady. I was talking about my brother who has struggled because of his experiences or because of our experiences. And it's almost like he doesn't believe he deserves good things. So if ever there's a fork in the road in life and he's got a choice to make, he'll choose the one that's going to screw him over in some way rather than the thing that's going to take him forward. And and I was talking to her about self-sabotaging personalities, and she said, "There's no such thing as a self-sabotaging personality." I was like, "Tell me more. I'm interested." Um, and ultimately it makes sense, right? Because the human brain is hardwired with one job. That's it. It's not about finding you happiness. It certainly isn't about self-harming or self-sabotaging. It's about keeping you safe. It's about
absolutely.
keeping you alive. That's all the brain is looking for, right? So what happens in that situation is that it's not that it seeks out what's going to harm you. It seeks out what's familiar to you because familiarity is what the brain perceives as safe. But
Hmm.
if what is familiar to you is, psychologically or physically abusive relationships from your childhood, then the big part of your brain is actually looking for that because that's just what's normal to you. And that is heartbreaking for me that we almost have to work against our own brains in a way, or maybe that's not the right terminology. We have to find a way to work with our brains to teach it a different way, to teach
Yeah.
it that something else is normal, something else needs to be familiar to us. But again, we do have that choice. We feel like we don't. Even when we feel like we're trapped, the only time when you're actually trapped is when somebody's put you in a cage and kidnapped you. We're never trapped in a relationship. We always have choice. Easy for me to say that I've never been personally in a violent or abusive relationship. So it's possibly a bit of a flippant comment to make, but I truly believe that we can empower ourselves, and actually community and support from external sources is I would imagine the key. I'm not an expert in domestic violence, so I'm not even going to go any further into that. But I do think that ultimately we have that choice. But of course, the psychology of it is complicated. And actually, just backtracking a little bit, I had a great conversation with one of the ladies in the group who runs a community program to help women who have been, you know, in domestically abusive relationships, or, you know, any kind of abusive relationship, people in situations where there's drugs, all kinds of things. And she herself came out of a 9-year abusive relationship physically. And she said that the psychology of the brain changes, and actually trauma does rewire your brain.
Yeah.
And what is reasonable to you is not what's reasonable to somebody who hasn't been in that situation, you know?
Yeah. And we won't kind of, because as you say, it's not an area of expertise.
We're not experts in it. So
no, it's something I have some training in because I've worked as a couples counsellor, but it's kind of in a different, you know, it's a different sort of way. And it's such a big topic.
yeah.
But I completely agree with what you're saying. Yes, you do have choice. However, it can be really difficult to know that when you're in the situation. Like you said, if one, you don't even realise that it is abusive, because usually when we talk about domestic violence or abuse, the thing that most people's mind goes to is physical violence, and it is so much more insidious than that. So it can feel really difficult to know that you're even in a relationship that is abusive and that you have choice. But I absolutely echo, there is choice, and there are support networks and there are spaces that you can go to if that's something that a listener's experiencing. And sort of just from the little bits that we've talked about, is like, oh, am I struggling? You know, is this something that I am experiencing? There are places that you can reach out to that will safely help you recognize that you are in a relationship that is abusive, and how to safely work on exiting that, because a lot of work for many people needs to go in that to do it safely.
Yeah, and I didn't want to generalize. I realized as I said it was a massive generalization, but truthfully, we do have choice. It's just that we can't see the choice, and even this idea of reaching out and building a support network around you possibly feels like that's not even an option when you're in that situation.
I mean, I think, you know, again, talking widely, it can feel impossible because you're constantly in a state of trauma, you're constantly in a state of fight or flight, your nervous system is overloaded, so you're overwhelmed. When you're in that state, making decisions is really difficult. The person that you professes to love you, that you love, treats you in a way that is in conflict with what love should be. But also, if you've experienced that growing up, that's your blueprint for what love is. So they, on some level, you know it's not okay, but like you say, it's the unconscious stuff, isn't it, that tells us that it is okay if you don't feel good enough. It's all of these things that kind of just on top of each other. So it can be done. Absolutely, you can make changes, and you've got choice. You absolutely have choice, and there's spaces and places that you can go to. But it's that unconscious stuff, it's the unpicking and the doing the work that you've got to start. And that again is where community and connection can be so important. Many people who go through domestic abuse are isolated, so it's like just being able to get into community is that first step. I know we've gone off on a real tangent, so we'll
I think it's something that I can speak to from personal experiences.
of course.
And this I think I don't think I'll ever understand this, but my mum says to me that still to this day that my dad was the love of her life, in spite of all of that. So, and I find that the psychology of that fascinating, and it honestly makes me question love a little bit. Because that is, like I said, something I will never personally understand. But I do know that we are just such complicated, dynamic creatures. And I think, you know, coming back to the element of choice, the choice is always, do I listen to myself? Do I value myself? We make it about us, right? So even before we make it about external decisions or actions or behaviors, we decide to choose ourselves first.
Yeah.
And it's not always an easy choice, because it usually means not choosing somebody else. But I think we have to always choose ourselves first, because we get one shot here. I mean, I'm quite weirdy woo. And I know lots of ladies who believe in past lives and reincarnation, and it's not my personal belief system, but I genuinely believe we just get one shot here. So we need to live our truest, most beautiful lives, and we can't do that if we are too busy seeking externally for validation, for reassurance, for permission. We need to start looking inside for that stuff, because that's the real powerful stuff. When somebody else gives you those things, it's not as powerful as when you give it to yourself.
Completely agree with you. It's so important to have that internal kind of conversation with yourself and be able to connect in with the fact that you are enough wherever you are, however you are, you know, whatever place you're in on your journey, bringing it back to that if you feel that you're broken or have been broken open, like you're still enough, how you are and what you like. I mean, too many thoughts, let me gather. Like, absolutely, like, because one of the things I talk about is, you know, it's like living your life your best way. Like, so it is about, yes, we're mindful of the impact that we have on other people, but absolutely choose you in the decisions that you're making, because you are the most important person in your life. Giving yourself love, giving yourself permission, as you've said, to do the things that you want to do, allowing yourself to have joy, operating from a place of being full is so much more fun, is so much more fulfilling, is so much more interesting, and it ripples out into the community that you're in, the people that you choose to love, because you then are giving of yourself from a place of being full, of feeling expansive again, of you know, being full up, being kind of full in your heart, and giving from a place of wanting to give is such a different energy to, I suppose I have to do this thing for this person, or feeling guilt around something. It's if we're people pleasing, this is something I've been exploring around. I heard somebody say people pleasing is manipulation. And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. And as harsh as it feels, I agree with the sentiment, because you aren't operating from a place of, you know, you're not giving because you want to give. You are, in a way, trying to manipulate the outcome from another person. And I think when you, or for me, when I start to think about that, I thought, yeah, there are times in my life like where, you know, you're people pleasing because you've been taught that's the way to be, but you're not allowing, if you say don't want to say no to somebody, you're not allowing them to experience your no. You're not allowing them to experience the reality of who you are. So there is an element of manipulation there, whether it's to keep yourself safe, whether it's just because you don't know any different. I thought it's quite interesting if you start to reframe it in I'm trying to keep everyone happy to I'm trying to manipulate everybody else's happiness. It feels very different, and is maybe not something people want to do, because it doesn't feel so good when you think about it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, there's so many things, so many points that came out for me when you were talking. And the first thing was coming back to something that Glennon Doyle wrote in Untamed, which is just the most phenomenal book. She was talking to her daughter, and her daughter was saying, well, I didn't want to disappoint you about something. So she did something she didn't want to do because she didn't want to disappoint her mum. And Glennon Doyle said to her, if ever you have to choose between disappointing someone else and disappointing yourself, you disappoint someone else.
Yeah.
And she was like, what, even you, mum? And she said, yes, even me. Because that's how important it is that we live our own life. And she also talked about how, like, when did it become a bad thing that being full of yourself was a bad thing? Oh, you're so full of yourself.
Yeah.
That's a great thing, right? What else is in there if it's not all me? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, and that's the there's sort of there's like that's possibly where the manipulation comes in, because like you desperately want people to like you, but you're not showing up as you. You're showing
Yeah,
up as like a weird version of yourself, and then
yeah,
actually you're sort of getting people to like something that's not authentic, and
yeah.
that
What
feels
you believe they want you to be, but like just be you, and the people that are important, like the people that love you for you will love you for you. Be you, like attract that tribe or
yeah.
vibe, you know, the people, the connection, the community that kind of see you and recognize that you are you, and that's
Oh,
okay in your
this
imperfection, in your like whatever it is that you bring along, because like it's okay.
this is literally my favorite thing to talk about. So when we were talking about not being enough just now, you mentioned it. So there's the I'm not thin enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough. Essentially, all that comes down to is I'm not enough, right?
Hmm.
I'm not enough as I am. But I've been thinking about this a lot recently. Maybe we don't feel like we're enough because we're not being our whole selves, right? We're not being
Yeah,
full of ourselves. Of course, we don't feel like we're enough because we're only being like 70% us. So be that 100% you. And actually, something beautiful happens when you do that. So I always used to use dating as an analogy, right? If you show up on a date, right, and you
yeah,
show up as this like half-assed version of yourself that isn't actually you, because you want that person to like you.
yeah,
So you're just sort of like testing the water. You're like, I'm just going to be this like slightly toned down, or possibly like more lively, or like, but you're not entirely yourself, right? What the worst thing that's going to, or the best thing that's going to happen is that that person's going to like that version of you, and then somewhere down the line they're going to realize that's not entirely you, and then they're going to wander off, and by that point you've become invested in this relationship, but actually they were never the person for you because you were never showing up as the right person for them. And the whole thing's just confusing. The worst case scenario is when you show up as this half-assed version of yourself, is that that person sitting opposite you may have absolutely fallen head over heels in love with you if you'd shown up as yourself, but because you didn't, they're not interested.
yeah. And I'm laughing because when I met my husband, the phrase I used is I was obnoxiously me. Like I brought
Yes.
every part of who I was. I bless him, he's been on a journey. Like I wasn't gonna be any less. I wasn't gonna pretend I wasn't happy with things that I wasn't happy with. I wasn't gonna I still, you know, don't, you know, it was just as it is, because it got to a point where it's like, I need to be accepted as I am. Don't put me on a pedestal. Don't like make me this like, you know, untouchable, amazing person. I am flawed. We all have moments, but do you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm on a journey. I'm rediscovering who I am, and I will bring each and every part of that with me, because that is what you're going to be in relationship with. And we will grow and we will change, and each evolution of me you get to experience. And I think it's so important to show up as you are.
Because you need to give it the best chance from the start, right? Because like I said, eventually people will figure it out that you that wasn't ever you, and then they'll wander off because they realize you're not the person for them. And that's not
Yeah,
just in like personal relationships, that's in friendships, in work relationships, it's in all of the relationships.
yeah,
I love that you said be obnoxiously. So I always say be unapologetically you, but I might
yeah.
upgrade it to be obnoxiously
Yeah,
you.
I mean, because it
That's
kind of
that.
felt, because of where I'd been to where I was, that's kind of how it felt for me. And it's like, no, I'm just not now. This is it. Like, this is the reality of who I am in this moment, and that's what I'm sharing. And like people around me sometimes go, "Oh my God, you're so confident." And it's like it's not that. It's not necessarily that I'm always confident. It's just that I choose to do what is right for me. And like sometimes I am shy. Sometimes I do feel like overwhelmed. So sometimes I do feel all these things, but I'm okay with being in the uncomfortable, because for me, what's on the other side of that is so much more important than it just being comfortable and being like, oh, this feels okay. Like, no, I want it to be what I want it to be. And
And
sometimes you have to go through the sticky stuff.
So I think there's a bit of like an upward spiral or a downward spiral, depending on which way you go with it. So when you, so my community is a prime example, right? So there's lots of ladies that have said they started showing up in there because they felt like it was a really safe place to be.
Hmm.
There's no judgment. It's very much about kindness and curiosity over judgment, and that's one of my values, and I really impress that on the group.
I'm laughing because wait till I finish the podcast. Carry on. It's okay.
So because it's this safe space, they felt like they could like dip a toe in showing up as themselves, right? Because a lot of us don't show up as ourselves online. Some of us don't even do it in our own like daily lives, right? Like we hide parts of ourselves, or we dim ourselves down, or we take the shine off, and we're not fully embracing who we are and showing up that way. And it makes me cry like from
Mm.
every pore, because it's just so sad. Because we have so much to offer, but if we can't offer that unless we find the right people to offer it to, because we can do the best work with the people who really get us and really relate to us and really connect with our energy and all of that lovely stuff. And if we're not showing up, then those people can never find us.
Yeah.
But in the group, so what happened was they would dip a toe, and they'd like experiment a bit, and they'd pop up a little post sharing a little bit of their story, and then they'd get this lovely feedback, this lovely embrace of, it's so lovely to see you, right? And then they'd go, oh, well, that felt nice. And then they'd show up a little bit more as their unapologetic selves. And then they'd get an even bigger embrace because it's the right place for them. And I think that this is the upward or downward spiral, is that if you're willing to be brave and take that little step forward in the right space, so you have to read the room a little bit, because if you do that in a place where you will not receive a warm welcome, then
Yeah.
it's going to make you just rescind, like hide back into yourself. But if you do it in the right places, then you will be warmly welcomed. And it's almost like people are going like that, like to just like pull you out of yourself very gently. And then you become deeply accepting of yourself because you've been accepted by others. But it has to start with that accepting yourself enough to try. So it starts with you, and then it's that upward spiral of other people accept and love me, so I love and accept myself a bit more, and I feel more confident, and then I show up even more of myself, and then people love me even more, and then I get even more confident. And that's where the upward spiral is. And then obviously it works the other way around as well,
Yeah.
where we get worse and worse if we're around the wrong people. And that's why community is so important. Choosing the right community, being around the right people, is so important for our own personal sense of self, really.
Mm.
I heard a great quote the other day, which was, we find selfhood in unity. And I loved that, because actually that is the power of community, is
Yeah.
that it enables. So I thought for a while, I genuinely thought, oh, we have to just go and like self-accept by ourselves over here, not with anybody else. I thought that for a while, and then I was like, no, that's silly. We can't do it on our own. Like, it's too hard. There are too many moving parts in our lives. We have to
Yeah.
surround ourselves with people that uplift us, and people that believe in us, and people that tell us that we're great, and people that tell us that they love us. But we get to choose that. We do. We get to choose the people that we surround ourselves with. Not so much with family. That's a bit of a different
Well, I mean,
area,
I would
grey
say
area.
you still have a choice. You still have a choice.
You do. It's
Might not be
harder.
easy, but there is a
Yeah.
choice. Yeah.
Of course, there's always a choice. It's just,
Yeah.
a hard choice, an easy choice. There's always a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And that in itself is hard sometimes to kind of accept that there
Yeah,
is a choice.
yeah.
And sometimes we do choose things that aren't great for us, but it is part of the journey, it's part of the learning experience, and it's part of kind of becoming.
Yeah. And I think the key to all of this really is the awareness piece, right? It's the bringing your awareness to your internal conversation, because we've all got a dialogue going like all the time. And I think it's really important for us to have a little listen into that, and I think the most powerful sort of strategy I think that I've used over the years, and I probably realized it when I was 15. I don't think I realized I was doing it when I was 15, but it was the tool, was to step outside of that conversation and to be an observer
Yes.
of your own thoughts, of your own belief systems, and have always a loving, kind, compassionate conversation. We have to take the judgment out of it, because if we are judging ourselves constantly, we're never going to get anywhere. So we have to be kind and compassionate to ourselves, be curious about ourselves, ask ourselves, why am I thinking that? Where does that belief come from? Because honestly, I did a blog post about this the other day. At the end of the day, the narrative that's going on inside of us becomes our reality, right? So the stories we tell ourselves become our reality. We need to tell ourselves better stories.
Yeah.
And then our reality changes.
And that weirdly is what I've been sat with this week, trying to write a post about the stories that we tell ourselves.
Really?
Yeah, and
That's the
how
focus.
to kind of change that, because like, you know, when we're in kind of the depths of sort of anxiety, or you know, we're struggling with things, we can tell ourselves these stories about how we can't do stuff. And I strongly believe that we can flip that. Like we've all got this ability to tell ourselves stories to stop ourselves from doing the things that we want to do. So we
Yeah.
can shift that and tell ourselves stories that empower us and help us achieve the things that we want to do. And it is just tiny little tweaks, little moments of checking in with ourselves, not being judgmental, like you say, observing our thoughts, observing like the the things that we do, and being like catching ourselves and like,
Yeah.
so at this point I've got a choice. I can spiral up, I can spiral down. And yes, it sounds really simplistic when I put it like this. I absolutely acknowledge it is a process.
Yeah.
It is difficult. It takes time. Like I've been there. I've been at the space where I made myself so much smaller to accommodate other people. And, you know, a message that I was given that it was I was too intimidating. I was too intelligent. I was too capable. So I made myself, yeah, I made myself smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's like, actually, that's not my problem. If you feel intimidated by me, that's not my problem. Because for the right people, how I show up is exactly what they need. And they're my people.
Yeah.
They're the
Those,
people that
those
I,
people, the ones that were intimidated, they're the ones that need to have a conversation with themselves about
yeah,
why do I
but
feel
I
intimidated?
took that, and
Yeah.
and I've changed my story around that. And I've,
Mm.
you know, so it's, we can all do it. It might be difficult, it might take some time, but it is like those little moments, and giving yourself credit when you do it. And just, you know, if you kind of fall back into old patterns, it's okay, but recognize that you're doing it.
Yeah.
Make that choice again, reinvest in yourself, and step forward into what it is that you want to create. Because when we imagine it, when we start to build it up in our mind, when we think about it, and we create that reality, and we can step and walk into that future that we want for ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing as well that makes it slightly more complicated is not just about belief. Sometimes it's about like what's going on behind the belief. Sometimes it's about the fear. If so we'll use like a belief as a reason to not do something, like as an
Yeah,
excuse. For example, I'm not good at showing up on social media. But actually what's going on is I don't want to show up on social media because I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of success. I'm afraid that nobody will engage. I'm afraid that I'll feel irrelevant, insignificant. You know, there's all of these fears that go on behind it. So we have to, this is why the conversation with ourselves has to be kind, because it takes a lot of unpicking, and we need to be nice to ourselves, you know, when we uncover excuses. So constantly I hear from women in business, I don't have time to do that, right? Granted, it's often a legitimate part of the reason why you're not doing something. I think
yeah,
it's rarely the whole reason. So it's a very convenient excuse because time is finite.
yeah,
And truthfully, we will find time to do the things that we feel comfortable with. Um, the things that are easy, you know, we can find time to do those things, but we will use it as an excuse to not show up on social media, for example, when actually we're afraid to show up on social media because of how, you know, we worry about what people think about us, or any
mm,
number of reasons. So we have to be mindful of the excuses that we're using for not doing the things. So it's belief systems, it's excuses, there's a whole set of stuff that goes on that relates to our past and experiences that we've had that create the stories we tell ourselves. And that's why, you know, like I said, the kindness is such a big part
yeah.
of it. Because if we start judging ourselves in that situation, we're like, oh my God, I'm so stupid for thinking that way. No.
Yeah, because you're just doubling down on what you're already telling yourself and the things that you're
Exactly.
already afraid of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that I talk about, and I see that's why what you talk about resonates so much with me. It is that kindness to self. It is that being aware of your self talk. It is being curious. It is being kind to yourself. Like, you live with you 24/7. Like, you need to be talking to yourself with kindness, out loud, in your head, in your journals, in your jokes, in everything that you do, because it all impacts on your experience of who you are.
Yeah, I've been running through my head so often when I hear, you know, the ladies in my group talking about their lack of self-belief or lack of confidence. And in my brain, because I've done so much work around this, in my brain, I'm like, why would you not believe in yourself? We're all incredibly capable. We all have a myriad skills. You know, there's things that we can do that other people can't do, but we don't see that, right? Comparisonitis works both ways, actually.
Yeah.
So we compare ourselves to people and we put ourselves down because we're not as good as them. But actually, you can do positive comparisonitis as well, right? You can see all of the things that you do have that other people don't have. But we don't do that. We tend to focus on the negatives.
Hmm.
So, and obviously I forget sometimes as well, because I at some point in the past felt exactly the same way, but because for me it was a while ago and I'm not in that headspace now, it's hard for me to get into it. So I have to really focus and think, well, okay, so you feel that way because of this.
Yeah.
But also, why would we not believe in ourselves? It's just, I know it seems like a really simple question, but like, this is what we've got, right? We are so capable. We are powerful beyond anything that we could possibly understand, but we don't allow ourselves to tap into that. We don't allow ourselves to be our full selves. And I think possibly that's why. That's why we don't
Mm.
believe in ourselves.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think we could probably talk for hours and hours. I think we've already talked longer than we intended to. So I think I'm going to leave it at that question
There's
for
so
people
many
to,
more things
yeah,
to talk about.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I've loved it, and I feel like I could talk for days, and maybe you'll come back on another time and we can cover another topic. But I feel if that's okay for you now, we kind of bring it to a close. People can come and find us in our communities and continue the conversation if they wish.
Absolutely.
Is is there anything you want to leave people listening with today?
I think just to reiterate because I do think that repetition is powerful, the element of choice that we have to bring our awareness to our internal conversation, because that's where the power is. We can't change our lives by changing the world around us. We can change the world around us by changing our internal lives. So the
Mm,
conversation that we're having inside. And something else that I think is a really, and this is how I always get the girls in my community, because we're all empathetic women. We all care so deeply about other people and we want the best for others, right? So I always say to them, look at it this way. By giving yourself permission to be your full, unapologetic, truest, most beautiful self, you give permission to all of those people around you to do the same. And what an incredible gift is that?
mm. And I so agree with you. So I'm going to leave it at that rather than add more on, because I feel like we'll just start talking and be here for a few more hours.
Love
But
it.
thank you so much for coming and being my guest today. I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
Yeah, you too, lovely. I would happily come on again. I love talking about this stuff. I think it's the power of conversation, right? Like
Yeah,
our saying in Affinity is changing the world one conversation at a time. And this really is like spreading of ideas, exchanging of resources. Like, this is how we change the world, through these kind of conversations.
I love it. All your details will be in the show notes. Same for me. If you want to find me or my guests, you can find me on Facebook as SRTT Self Care, or visit srtt.co.uk. Hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. And as always, stay curious and be kind to yourself.
Yeah, I know you were laughing. I love it.